Um, and instead of S tier, let's call this meta. All right. So let's start with the obvious. Let's start with stuff that is in the trash bin, right? Trash bin. Aflock. Aflock's in the trash bin. Um, every hunter spec that is not BM hunter, we can probably throw that in the trash bin, right? Well, actually, survival is not bad right now, so we'll throw marksman in the trash bin. Survival actually it does good damage, believe it or not. The problem is it's survival, right? Like, why would you play a hunter and then like not play a ranged hunter, and then also like why would you play a hunter? So we'll actually put survival in C tier. Realistically, their damage is a lot better than that. Does it live? No, not really. So the best one that's at living is also BM Hunter, and BM Hunter does the most of it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put Hunter in A tier. So BM Hunter is very good. It does amazing damage, both single target and AoE. It can pretty much do both at the same time if it wants it to. They have a large health pool, right? They have a large health pool, which means that they don't just normally get one shot randomly because they have more health than everyone. And they have the ability to give themselves a larger health pool. Um, and they have one of the most broken defensives in the game. It's called Play Dead. It's not called Play Dead, but I like to call it Play Dead. Which is anytime they are targeted with literally anything in the game, they could just play dead and it just stops casting on them. It works sort of the same way as Shadow Meld. Um, it is one of the most broken abilities in the game and it's underrated. So I would put them in A tier. Um, Notice that meta adjacent, I would call this A plus. If you want a more accurate description. Anything that is in meta S or meta adjacent A plus is stuff that's perfectly valid to bring into your squad, right? So if you want to start filling stuff out, let's start with some of the more obvious stuff, right? Vengeance Demon Hunter, I would put that in meta. Havoc Demon Hunter, I would put that in meta. Um, Even after all of the nerfs, Havoc Demon Hunter is doing very, very strong. It's doing still very well. It's still one of the top damage. It provides, the buff. Now, yeah, they're very good and they're very hard to kill. You could maybe make an argument that it's meta adjacent and they may not be in the final squad, but I would still put them up here. I would probably put them towards the bottom of the meta. Um, your two meta tanks right now, you got the Vengeance Demon Hunter and you got the Prot Pally. Right now, the way that it's shaking up, I would actually, although I personally like running with a Vengeance Demon Hunter more than a Prot Paladin, and I've had way more success with Vengeance Demon Hunter than Prot Paladin, I will put Prot Paladin at the very, very top of meta. Why would I do that? Because all of the highest keys in the world right now are actually being timed by Prot Paladin. So this is more, while this uh, tier list over here is sort of, here, I'll even put it over here. Beta testing tier list, right? So that's what it is. Versus this is not beta. This is current tier list, right? Current tier list. And I misspelled current. Current. There you go. Right? So this was the old tier list that people were sort of thinking. Notice how I don't have Aug. That is very purposeful. Aug is still meta, but there's a couple caveats there, right? So first things first, I'm gonna put Aug at the very bottom of the meta. So like it's more like over here. Because as we've seen, it depends on the key level. Or actually, you know what? Let's give it its own thing. Let's give it in one below, and let's call it Aug, because Aug deserves its own thing, right? So I'm gonna put Aug over here, and we're gonna put a note here that says for high keys meta. Um, Low keys. Trash. Right? So Aug deserves its own thing because it's weird. Because for keys that are like 27, 28 plus, you essentially need the Aug to live. But for like a 20 key, Aug is literal trash bin, right? So it really depends, right? It also depends on how tanky your squad is. So if you have like a Havoc Demon Hunter, a Warlock, and a Ret Paladin, do you really need an Aug? The answer is probably no. Think we only timed 27 on Rise with Ret, didn't have Aug on it? Yeah. So like you can even do like not super high keys, but like semi high keys uh without an Aug. So I would definitely say Aug has gone from sort of like superior, needed and everything to it's still meta, but it's its own thing. It's essentially it's S tier meta for the highest keys, but at the same time for anything below like a 25, it's really yeah, it's conditional S. Yeah, exactly. It's a conditional S. So that's why I'm putting it its own one. Not quite in meta, because again, you have to keep track for like also like your 20 keys, right? So like in a 20 key, Aug is literally going to be doing tank damage. Maybe even worse. Like it is terrible. And like when I see people saying only looking for an Aug for a 21 key, I am just laughing. I am laughing so goddamn hard. Like I am just laughing. All right. Let's cover the rest of the tanks since we've already done some of the tanks. Bear. Where would I put Bear? Bear has Mark of the Wild, right? So that's good. But honestly, it pretty much ends there. So Bear isn't bad right now, but it's really not great, right? It's a decent source of Mark of the Wild. Resto Druid is not bad as a healer, but it's not terrible, right? So where I would put it, let's go B for Bear, right? That makes sense. And like the nice thing about the tank meta right now is there's no bad tanks, right? All the tanks are pretty decent. Um, and also, by the way, we're gonna keep track of stuff like final builds and gear. So this is assuming everything. So we're gonna put Bear and B for Bear. Uh, let's talk about Brewmaster. Brewmaster is interesting. So Brewmaster does pretty good damage. They're not as squishy as they were before, but I don't think they're good enough to put in A tier. They provide Mystic Touch, which is nice, but when Mistweaver is your number 1 or number 2 healer, Mystic Touch is not super valuable. Also considering that all of the strongest DPS right now, which we'll get to, are dealing magic damage, not super important, right? So I think we're gonna put Brewmaster in the top of B tier. Who else do we have? We have Blood Decay, right? Blood Decay. So I think Blood Decay is a pretty easy one. I'm gonna put it probably at the bottom of A tier for right now. I think Blood Decay, while it doesn't have a ton of utility, their damage is very high, and with Legendary, they're going to be the highest damage tank by miles, right? It's really between top of B tier and bottom of A tier. I think we're going to put it at the bottom of A tier. I think that's probably where it goes. Prot Warrior. Oh, sorry, there was apparently an ad. As I was saying, Brewmaster, top of B tier. It's decent. That's all. Blood. Blood is interesting. I think Blood is going to struggle at high keys, but it is definitely the tank that is doing the most damage. There's no question about it. But I think they're going to cap out at some point. So I'm going to put Blood at the very bottom of A tier. I was deciding between the top of B and bottom of A, but I think we're going to keep it probably towards the bottom of A tier. Very last tank, Protection Warrior. I think they have some niche, very good use in. So it's the bottom of A tier just because of damage? Yes. And it's not just because of damage, it's because they're gapping every other tank by like 50%. Like you're gonna see A Blood DK with the Legendary, you're gonna see them doing like 200, 250k DPS in some higher keys, while other tanks are gonna be doing like 150, 160k or something. Like it is a massive damage. And like these other tanks really just aren't anything special. So what is slightly higher than B? I guess you could call it like B plus, right? But do I really want to add another tier on the tier list just for blood? I mean, I guess B for blood, right? Could do B plus because blood type. Get it? Haha. Um, but yeah, protection warrior. Protection warrior definitely has its niches. A couple keys I could see it being very good, but while it's viable, I'd probably put it as probably the worst tank right now. Honestly, it's between them and druid. Um, I just haven't seen a good one really do much, so I'm gonna sort of put it like that. It doesn't deserve to be in C tier. I don't think any tank is C tier right now. Um, that's just my opinion. I think all the tanks are viable. So really, anything in B or higher is viable. That's really what it is. So we should also just say that, viable. And then C is like bad. And then trash bin is trash bin. Also, I should probably mention this is obviously M+, right? Just so no one's confused. So that's all the tanks. Let's finish up the healers. Let's do all the healers. So healers are pretty easy. I know these pretty well. So your meta healer this season is probably going to be Disc Priest. Your meta healer number 2 is going to be Mistweaver. Your next best, so your meta adjacent, is going to be your Resto Druid. And then it sort of goes down from there. So I would put Holy Paladin, I would probably put in B for viable, but I'd probably put it towards the bottom. And I would probably put Evoker Healer somewhere around A. The problem is, why would you bring this Evoker when you could have this Evoker? That's really what it comes down to. But like honestly, their healing is pretty good right now. There's nothing wrong with it. That's just really what it is. All right. Resto Sham. I'd probably put Resto Sham at viable. I would definitely put it higher than Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin is pretty down bad right now. B for bad, I guess. No, B is viable. You could make an argument that Holy Paladin, you've had bad experiences. Well, the healers that you're gonna find in the 20 to 21 level are just really bad healers, and that's just being honest. So like you have to sort of find the middle ground of the healer, right? So like this list is assuming that the healers are playing like somewhat competently, right? Because you gotta have like the same place you're coming from, right? If you're comparing the worst, then you gotta go to like a +7 key, and like the healers may not even be pressing their healing buttons, right? Or you may not even have a healer in the key because like a +7 dungeon probably just isn't doing any damage, right? So this tier list, what is the most important thing to know about this tier list? The most important thing to know is in the current tuning of dungeons, you're not going to run into this problem in 20s, but you're going to run into this when you get to like 26 plus. Is especially on Tyran, dungeons are just one-shotting. If you watched the 28 Tyran I timed earlier for Atal, if you didn't have a defensive for every single racking pain and just everything Yasmin was throwing at you, you were one-shot. You know, Soul Ren was doing 95% of everyone's health, and everyone was pressing a defensive every single time they had something. And when they didn't, the AUG was covering them. So, going back to the healers, what does that mean? The most important thing for healing and dealing with that is not actually healing throughput, it is actually effective health. So, what's the best way of having effective health? Shields. So Disc Priest is going to be your number 1. That is your best healer right now for high keys. Your second best is Mistweaver. They have a 1 minute, I think it's called Chiju or Chiji, whatever it's called. That puts like a 150 to 200k shield on everyone. Also, like in terms of throughput, Mistweaver is probably the highest throughput healer in the game right now. Disc is probably number 2 or number 3. Probably number 3. Uh, Resto Druid is an interesting one. So Resto Druid doesn't really have any shields. It's just that their healing throughput is absolutely insanely high, and their damage is also decently good too. So like I would put it in this new tier I'm calling meta adjacent. Understand that meta adjacent means that you could easily swap out anything you see in the meta adjacent tile here with anything in the meta, right? That's really what it means. So anything in meta, anything in aug, anything in meta adjacent, these are all things you could very easily bring in things that you will see in like 26 plus keys. You'll even see occasionally a couple things in the A tier, but generally speaking, you're looking at these sort of top tiers, especially these top two. While you will see things occasionally in the A tier, more than likely your sort of final Giga Comp squad is probably going to either be in meta or meta adjacent, depending on how things shake out, and also dependent on what your squad comp is, right? Like for instance, you're not going to have a prop paladin and you're not going to have 2 tanks in the same squad, right? And here's a good one. For instance, if you have a prop paladin, you're much more likely to have a havoc demon hunter, right? Because these two sort of have similar utility. I mean, the utility is really good, but when you have one demon hunter, it definitely devalues the second one. Augur trash for low keys. How low are we talking? For low keys, we're talking trash bin. And for low, we're talking like anything like 22, 23. Realistically, anything below a 25. But sure, you could call it a 23. But yeah, Augs are probably doing tank damage in your 20s, and that's just being honest. They're probably just sending their stuff on CDs. They're probably not tracking CDs. You're probably not in comms in your weekly 20, right? Aug is only good when you're coordinated. That is where the value of Aug comes from. It comes from survivability and being coordinated. So in your low keys, Augs are just not doing anything, right? And that's just the truth. That's just what it is. All right, so we've talked about the healers. We've talked about the tanks. Let's get into more of the DPS. Let's talk about rogues. So rogues are interesting. I would put subtlety in A. I'd probably put it at the top of A. I think they're underrated. They're pretty good. Nothing wrong with them. Assassination was very strong, but they got nerfed a couple times. So I would probably put them at the very top of B. It's either the top of B or the bottom of A. But with the 15% nerf to Kingsbane, that really, really hurt their damage. And Sub just sort of has a better damage profile anyways. Outlaw is probably the one I'd put at meta adjacent. Notice that I'm not putting any rogue spec in meta. I do not think rogue is going to be part of the like Giga meta squad. But there is a possibility. And that's why I'm sort of putting in that meta adjacent, saying, hey, there is a chance you'll see this rogue spec, but I'm going to put it sort of towards the bottom, as I think it's unlikely. So you could probably put it either in A or A+, but that's sort of how I see it. So outlaw damage is good. I wouldn't call it so here's the thing. So I wouldn't call it crazy damage. I would call it good damage. And like it's good overall, yes. But their boss damage, at least the ones that I've seen, are kind of meh to low. And they don't have any burst. And burst is actually really, really important for M+. There's a lot of stuff, especially like little smallies, that you need to kill right away, because smallies tend to have like very little health, but they tend to be very deadly. A good example of those is the Saurids in Atal, the maggots in Waycrest, is these like little tiny mobs. What's another good one? The little blood things in Darkheart Thicket. I wouldn't call these smallies, but they definitely have less health. You got the flowers in Everbloom. All these mobs that have like not that much health, The danger comes is if they're living too long, right? Like those maggots, they're good. Like 2 or 3 maggots spitting the same person, that person's just gone, right? But they only have like 2 million health, right? So you think like, oh, they're not that scary. Yeah, just wait until they have like 3 or 4 million health. You're not killing them instantly, and then something just dies. Um, Outlaw is also target capped. That's the other thing going against Outlaw. Outlaw is like hard target capped at 5. Um, so in the world where you're trying to pull bigger and bigger, and actually, you know what? Maybe that's a mark against them, because Outlaw is target capped at 5. Maybe we put them at the very top of A tier. I could really see it being either one. Maybe we'll move it later, but I can really see it being A or A plus. It's definitely sort of between there. But yeah, Outlaw is essentially target capped at 5. I think I have to move sub down. Yeah, probably. We could probably move it to the bottom of A tier. I'd probably move it over here though. Yeah, no, Outlaw is definitely better. I'm pretty sure Blade Fury isn't Blade Fury 5 targets? Let's double check. Either way, they are pretty hard target capped, right? What we're looking for, talent calculator, Outlaw. Blade Fury. Was it Dancing Steel? Oh, is this it? Blade Fury strikes 3 additional enemies. Is that it? Yeah. 8 is definitely a lot better than 5. But it's not like a fall off. It's not like a square root where you could like sort of hit like 15. It's like a hard cap 8, right? Strike, yeah, it says 5. So strike 5 nearby targets, and cause your single target abilities to strike up to 4 additional. Blade Fury now instantly strikes 8. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, okay, so it's 8 target capped. That's definitely better than 5. Um, hmm. Problem is a lot of the pulls are bigger than 8. Like there are a lot of like 15 and 20 pull. Uh, I still could put in either because their single target is pretty bad from what I've seen. And more importantly, they have no burst damage. Their burst is terrible. Well, we'll leave it at the bottom of A plus, but we'll think about it more. Let's go over to mage specs. Um, the best mage spec, I would put Frost in meta. I would put Fire in meta adjacent, and I would throw Arcane somewhere in A. I think all the mage specs are good. Um, yeah, there's an argument that you could put both of them, but I genuinely believe that Frost is just a better spec right now. And here's the thing, if you're a mage, you could play any of the 3 specs, right? A good mage player is going to be good at playing all 3. And you're just going to play the best mage for the dungeon. And most of them, that's going to be Frost. So, like, yes, I guess you could say that Fire is also meta, but meta adjacent is essentially the same thing, right? You have to remember, I'm saying that meta adjacent is you could very easily pull any of these specs, and they'll also be part of the meta. I think Fire is best with an Aug. Maybe. But have you seen a really good Frost? I see Frost and they are pumping. Like Frost is very, very good right now. I would say Frost is better than Fire. Um, I think we'll leave it like this for right now. I think this is an accurate representation. I would say Frost is definitely in the meta. I would say Fire could very equally be there. In fact, you know what? Let's put it at the top, right? I think that's fair. We're gonna put Fire at the top. Um, Yeah, that's the one thing Fire doesn't have. Fire has very good single target. Or actually, I wouldn't even call it very good. Fire has good single target, but they're lacking in AoE. All their AoE is coming just from ignites because they literally don't even press Flame Strike anymore. Um, so like Fire is good. Like there's nothing wrong with it, but um, it's just not as good as Frost. Arcane, A for Arcane, right? But also I think Arcane is probably the worst of the three specs. Um, that's just sort of what it feels like right now. All right, balance. Ooh, balance is the interesting one. So everyone was thinking balance was going to be meta. Where are all the balance druids? That's sort of what happened. Balance is nowhere to be found in the raid. Hell, they played a goddamn feral druid on the last couple bosses. That's how bad. That's how down bad balance druid is. So I think we're gonna go B for balance, right? And I think we're gonna put it up next to its friend in the bear. So is viable. It's just it's not that great. That's just what it is. I don't see it in many keys. A lot of people have rolled off it. Um, yeah, it just all of the druid specs are a little down bad right now. They're all a little down bad in the B. They're feeling the blues. There you go. All the druid specs are in B because they're feeling the blues. So we'll put feral over here. All three druid specs. Resto's probably the most viable out of all of them if you want to get your Market of Wild. I would put feral as the highest one. Feral is definitely doing more damage and seems more interesting, but they're a melee, right? And they are not that tanky. So if you're gonna take a melee, why would you take feral, right? Uh, let's talk about Warlock. So we immediately put Af in the trash bin. That's to no one's surprise, right? Um, Demolock. Demolock is going into meta. This might be the first time in a very long time that Warlock has ever been meta. Because usually they're not. Because Warlock, just like DK and Warrior, have a fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw is they provide jack shit to the squad, right? When you're looking to, when you are a raid comp and you have 20 spaces, it's much easier to just justify niche utility. But when you only have 5 spaces in a squad, the utility that each member brings is infinitely more important, right? And Warlock just doesn't bring anything, right? They're not making other people tankier. They don't have a ton of CC. All they have right now is they have health stones. But again, health stones aren't that important right now because you're getting one shot, right? A health stone is not going to stop you from getting one shot. So what do they have? They have gate, they have health stones, they have a summon portal, I guess, for whatever that's worth. But really what they have right now is they have a ton of damage, right? They have so much damage, an unbelievable amount of damage. In fact, I believe aside from Ret Paladin with the legendary, they're probably going to be the highest or second highest damage in the key. And they're insanely tanky. So they have two really important things going for them. They're insanely tanky. Like, they don't even need an AUG. They're just going to live stuff, even on high keys. Right? So they're insanely tanky. And they do a ton of damage. And that just makes them meta. In a world where everything is one-shotting and you need tanky DPS in the meta, that's why they're in there. So we're going to put Warlock in the meta. Surprisingly, this might surprise you guys. We're going to put Havoc over here in the meta. I think in your final M+ squad, Havoc is good and it's important, and they're not squishy, but they're definitely squishier than a mage and they're squishier than a Warlock. And they all do about the same damage now that Havoc's been nerfed. So I'm going to put all these three together and I'm going to keep them there. Yeah, I think this is pretty accurate right now. Destruction Warlock. Destruction did get some buffs, but I'm going to put it in C for bad. Because why would you play Destruction or AF when Demo is just way better? I would say Destruction is a little bit better than AF, so I wouldn't quite put it in the trash bin. I would say it's a little bit better than trash bin, but C is not much better, you know? Shamans. Shamans. Enhance is still good. They're squishy. They actually Enhance did just get a 2% buff to their defensive recently, last week, the week before, whatever it was. So they are a little bit tankier. Um, I don't think they're going to be in the ultimate squad, but I would very easily put them towards the top of A tier. Enhanced damage is very good. They always have had and still have a very good damage profile for M+. They have a very high amount of single target damage, and they have a very good ability to funnel. Funnel is very valuable in M+. Very, very valuable. The main problem with Enhance is what it's always been. They don't have a ton of utility, and they are relatively squishy. And for those reasons, you're probably not going to see them in the meta. Our brethren, the Elemental Shaman. Right now, Elemental Shaman is kind of just a worse version of Enhance. It does have a lot of damage. They are pumping. And for that reason, I will put them at the top of B tier. It's just a worse version of Shaman. It just whatever Enhance brings, it's just slightly worse for Ellie, right? That's just what it is. The only reason they're not in C or trash bin is because they do a ton of damage. Like a ton of damage. So you could maybe make an argument that like maybe they're the bottom of A tier, but I wouldn't really feel comfortable putting Ellie Shaman in the same tier as Enhance, because I think Enhance is just slightly better. Alright, let's talk about... Oh, wait, we forgot about a healer. We forgot about Holy Priest. Holy Priest is actually really strong right now. I'm going to put Holy Priest towards the top of A tier, which is unexpected, because people were originally saying, oh, it's Holy Priest, whatever. I've seen Holy Priest pumping the damage. Like, Holy Priest does a lot of damage, like, a lot. Like, you would not expect it. And they've gotten buffed a couple times. So, like, their healing output is actually really, really high. But they run into the same problem as, you know, like, Evoker, which is they have high output, their damage is good, but that's not what you need right now. You need shields. So I'm gonna put it next to the Evoker, but I'm gonna actually put it slightly higher than them. This is my personal experience. I've seen Holy do very good things. They have some interesting utility for M+. It's just not as good as Priest. But it's definitely viable for sure. There's no question about it. It's more than viable. It's A tier. All right. Now we move on to. Oh wait, no, we have two more, and then it gets a little more complicated. Shadow Priest. So Shadow Priest was in the trash bin. They got a large buff. It was about an 8% damage buff. So instead of in the trash bin, they're now just bad. Not much else to say there. That's just the truth. So you know they were in the trash bin. They got an 8% buff. Now they're still sort of in the trash bin, but one higher, I guess. So they're just bad. Evoker. Evoker was seeming pretty hot on the beta. Their tier set seemed really strong, and we've seen a couple in raid really just pump that damage like crazy. So you definitely do a lot of damage. There's no question about it. And even after all that damage, they were getting perpetually buffed on the beta, which was interesting. I have yet to see a single one in M+. I'm sure there's one or two floating around somewhere. But just the pure absence of them, because of that, it's unlikely that they're going to be meta. So you know that they're not going to be S or A tier, or sorry, S or A+. And then you sort of run into the same problem of, you know, anytime you have multiple DPS specs, you're always going to choose the better one. So like, you know, when you have Aug, why would you run a Evoker, right? It's sort of the same issue. They share similar utility, except Aug is much tankier and provides utility to your squad. However, their damage is pumping. So I would probably put them somewhere in either B or A tier. Leaning towards more the top of B tier or bottom of A tier. I think I'm gonna put them probably towards the top of B tier, solely because I just haven't seen enough of them to be confident to put them into A tier. So I'm gonna put them slightly above the assassin rogue. I'm gonna put them towards the top here. If I were to put an Elisham, like the best Elisham against the best Dev Evoker, um, I think the Elisham might actually do more damage. Which might sound crazy, might not, but I've seen Ellie Shamans do some pretty disgusting things. I've seen both of them do some pretty disgusting things. Um, but yeah. All right. Is it tier maybe B? Enhance? No, enhance is very good. If you haven't seen a good one, they pump. Like they enhance is a bit of a sleeper. They're not meta sleeper, but enhance is strong. Windwalker. Okay, so Windwalker was in the trash bin. They got some massive buffs. So I'm gonna put them probably right below Shadow Priest. So both Shadow Priest and Windwalker were both in the trash bin, and then Blizzard is like, hey, let's give them like 10 to 20% buffs. Um, I haven't seen a Windwalker yet in M plus recently, like after the buffs, so I don't know exactly how much damage they're doing. But, considering that they got like 200% buffs to some of their AoE, I'm sure they're doing some amount of damage. But until I could confidently say that, like, hey, they're actually looking really strong, I'm going to leave them in C tier. But there's no way they're still in the trash bin, right? There's just no way. Monk runs into the same problem as Warlock and Warrior and um, single target they will beat most DHs. Are you talking about Windwalker? Is that true? Okay, so those buffs were way bigger than I thought. They're probably like 20% or something ridiculous. So let's put them in the B tier then. Um, let's put them next to the Balance Druid. Let's put them over there then. 250 without an AUG? I don't know about that, man. DHs are not doing 250 without an AUG. Or is that not single target? Is that overall you're talking about? And also like what key? Because like obviously that matters. Because like I'm doing like single target some bosses. No way. I'm calling cap on that. I'm calling hard cap on that. You saw in DHT. Uh, you know that the only single target boss in DHT is the last boss, right? The first boss has the cats or whatever those things that spawn are. So it's a one target fight that part of the time or most of the time is a three target fight. And then you got the root things on the second boss, and then a lot of time you're purposely spawning the dragons to get funnel for the third boss. The last boss is the only one that's actually single target. So you might be a little confused there. But I'm willing to put it in B tier. I think we could put it next to the Boomies. Here's the problem. For a DPS, it's hard to put anything at A tier or higher if they don't have utility. So this sort of goes back to the age-old problem of why seeing a demo warlock in S tier meta is very unusual. And just the problem of M plus in general, right? So this goes back to you only have 5 slots, right? And utility is really, really important. And notice that I kept the 5 specs that all are getting the Lego for last because those are worth talking about. The problem with M plus historically is always it comes down to utility. If you have something that is doing incredible damage, like truly, truly incredible damage, you will create an entire squad just to simp for that one spec, right? So let's harken back to season 1, right? So if you remember season 1 of Dragonflight, Enhanced Shaman was meta, right? So you built an entire squad. So you would have, what do you have? Um, you had what was it? You had a prot paladin, you had a shadow priest, and you had uh resto druid, enhanced shaman, and havoc demon hunter, or something like that was season 1, right? So you would have essentially the resto druid barking the enhanced shaman, and you had the prot paladin sacking the enhanced shaman. So essentially, they found a way to bring the spec that was doing incredible damage in season 1 by just building an entire squad around it, right? So that does sometimes happen when like a spec is just doing absolutely incredible damage. Um, but like we're talking, it needs to be like absolutely incredible, you know? You feel like Boomy may be closer towards A? I don't think so, especially considering a lot of Boomies have been rolling off of Boomy and towards something else. I don't think they're even in A right now, right? Um, and also like Raid, while Raid and M Plus are fundamentally different, Raid can also give you a good idea. The fact that in Raid, all the Boomies are turning into Ferals because Feral is just stronger than Boomy. That's also another indication that Boomy may not be as strong as people think. Um, so for those reasons, I'm pretty confident in putting Feral higher than Boomy, and I'm also pretty confident saying there's no way Feral is A. You feel like M plus viability is 90% based on survivability and damage. That is 100% correct, right? So the viability, and if you take a look at this tier list here, that is 100% true, right? So what are the two most important things? Survivability and damage. What's most important after that? It's utility. So what is the difference between all these specs that are in trash bin or C or B or even A and the ones that are in S or A+? And by the way, A+ is meta adjacent, meaning you could easily pick something from A+ and it might be in the meta squad, right? The difference is utility. That's usually what it is. Rogue utility is not what it used to be, especially considering just everyone has so many stops. So Rogue has gone from like, oh my god, it has like AoE stealth and they're tanky and they do good damage, and by the way, they have so much goddamn CC, but everything in the meta has so much CC that the Rogue's utility has been diminished. That's why you're not seeing a billion Rogue specs all over the meta anymore. So let's go back to the final point. It's unusual to see something like Demo Lock in the meta because their damage and survivability are just astronomically high, but they have literally no utility. None that matter for M+, at least. So now let's look at the last 5 specs. So the last 5 specs, those are all the ones that can get the legendary for DPS, right? So we have numbers on the legendary now. The legendary is much stronger than everyone thought it would be. It is insanely good for M+. I don't have the exact numbers for non-ret, but in terms of single target for non-ret, I've been hearing about anywhere from 12 to 15,000 single target. So this is for your warriors and for your DKs. If you know anything else, please correct me, but those are the numbers I've been hearing. Again, not for ret, we're talking about warrior and DK. I've been hearing about 12 to 15k single target, and I've been hearing the dot is doing maybe about 3,500 to 4k for them. So in M+, maybe the dot is doing an extra like 30 to 40k. The overall damage for the specs are going to go up probably about 25,000, somewhere in that vicinity. So it's really good for them. Like 25k, that is sizable. That is good. How much does that help? How much does that help these specs? So we're talking about the warriors and the DKs. Let's start with warrior, because I've seen a couple warriors. I've played with them. Arms and Fury is interesting. The problem with arms right now is, in terms of damage, Fury and arms are about equal. The biggest differential is that Fury is significantly tankier than arms. So for that reason, Fury is going to be 1 higher. We're going to assume that with the legendary, with the legendary, Warrior is going to be one of the higher damage M plus options, but Warrior has the fundamental flaw, they just don't provide anything for the squad, right? They give Battle Shout, but the list pretty much ends there. They have almost no CC, they have no group utility. Shout really doesn't do anything. Um, the list pretty much ends there. They have good damage. Um, Warrior is definitely tankier than Arms, but how tanky are they compared to like a Ret Paladin or a Demo Lock or a Havoc Demon Hunter? Not that much. So with the Legendary, I would probably put Warrior at the bottom of A, and I would probably put Arms at probably the bottom of B. Just one full level worse. Um, so that should pretty much wrap up the Warriors. There's really just not much to say about them. Like, they do good damage with the Legendary. I know that for a fact. They will be doing good damage. But it's really just a utility problem. DKs. DKs have the same problem. DKs have the same exact problem of Warriors. What does a DK bring to the squad? Well, I don't think their damage is all that bad. I wouldn't say Holy or Frost. I think they're probably about the same. I know Holy got a bunch of buffs recently, like a couple weeks ago. But I don't think that really necessarily changed too much. I don't see a bunch of DKs running around. We can look at Raider IO, and we could see, hey, are there any super high M plus DKs? Let's see what they look like. Give me one sec. I've only seen a few DPS, DKs, and keys. The highest DK in the world for DPS is a little above 3,500. A DK has not even completed a 29 yet, a couple 28s. And that's number 1 in the world. Number 2 is under 3,500, and by the time you get to number 3, you're already almost at 3,400. So they're struggling. The 1 or 2 good DKs I know, they're not even 3,400. So the DKs are struggling. The Legendary will definitely make it a bit better. And yeah, I think there's some sleeper potential, but here's the problem. And this is why they are definitely not meta and definitely not meta adjacent, and why I would hesitate to even put them in A tier. Even if their damage is good, what are they providing to the squad? Right? That is the question. And the answer to that question is, it's the same problem with Warrior. Even if their damage is really good, which, by the way, it's not S tier damage. Even with the Legendary, it's not. Okay, so Max saying that they might be used in the MDI. Sure, maybe. Holy, historically, let's talk historically. Historically, Unholy has been in more MDIs than it hasn't, right? Unholy is one of the most popular choices for the MDI. But what is the MDI? MDI is a bunch of good players going into little shitter keys and doing them as fast as possible. Frankly, it's relatively uninteresting. MDI is not really about player skill. It's about finding the most efficient way to do really good damage and do it fast. MDI is probably going to be, what, like 22 keys or something? It's a joke level key, and they're just trying to do the dungeons as fast as possible. I don't really call the MDI an expression of skill. I would call the Great Push, that is an expression of skill. I think the Great Push is way more interesting than the MDI. At least me personally. And whether something is used in the MDI or not, that really has no bearing on this tier list for what's going to be good this season. I think they're both going to be viable. I would put them at the top of B tier, but it pretty much ends there, right? Even if their damage is pretty good. While DKs have some ability to be tanky, especially with AMS, they are not the most tanky. Their damage is going to be decent, but what utility do they have after that, right? They have some grips, and it pretty much ends there, right? They don't have any externals, not really. They don't have a ton of CC. they're not making your group tankier. In a world where dungeons are one-shotting, DK is not the thing you're going to be picking up. So for that reason, I'm going to put them towards the top of B. I think we could probably put them at the very top, both of them with the legendary. Maybe Frost is a little lower, like something like this. I think that's pretty accurate. All right, the ones you guys have been wondering about. Yeah, for that reason, I'm out. Exactly. All right, red is the interesting one. If you ask a talking head, they'll put it over here. If you ask me, I might put it somewhere over here. So where is Ret? Where is Ret? That is the question. Where does Ret land? Ret is an interesting one. From what I've seen, based on my keys that I've done 27s, 28s, etc. We are doing a little bit less damage than the Havoc Demon Hunter right now, which is your like quintessential damage in M+. We're about 5% lower than them. That's without the legendary. The legendary for Ret we're doing is going to be 17 to 20k more single target in M+, and the dot is doing about 5k DPS per enemy in combat. The average value of the legendary is going to be about 40,000 fucking damage. That is going to make us the highest damage in M+. Higher than the Havoc, higher than the Mage, higher than the Warlock. We are unkillable. So the question is, does that make us meta adjacent or does that make us meta? Which one does that make us? That is the question, right? So we have very good damage, right? We have the best survivability in the game. Red is more tanky than anything else in here, including sometimes the tanks. Oh, hello? Oh, we lost power in the headset for a sec. Alright, we're back. So the question is, where does Ret land? Does that land us in meta adjacent, or does that land us in meta? Right? Does the Lego make us meta? I would say... I would say probably meta with Lego. Right? I think that probably sounds accurate. What do you guys think? So it's definitely not in any of these lower tiers. The lowest it could possibly be is A. Going based off of the damage that I've seen. I've played with some of the best demon hunters. I've played with some of the very best mages and warlocks and everything in between. From what I've seen, and by the way, this is all without the legendary. I do not have the legendary yet. I am keeping up with them in damage. They're doing about the same damage as me, or sometimes about maybe 5% more. That is without the legendary. In the world of 5%, we're talking, 300 to 400,000 in most dungeons. Your Blackrook Hold, I'm doing like maybe 450k to 500. Your Everbloom. I did 27 Everbloom earlier. By the way, this is tyrannical, obviously. I did 27 Everbloom earlier. Before the second boss, I was doing almost 700,000 overall. I know that sounds crazy to some people, but that's how much damage you do in that place. It's pretty crazy. Ret does a shit ton of damage, and that's without the Lego. Like I was saying, I know for a fact that the legendary for your general single target for raid is about 17,000 and some change. For M+ with an AUG, that's going to be about probably 20,000. Yes, that means Ret is the two-hand is bigger than DK and Warrior, much bigger. The numbers that I've heard for DK and Warrior are somewhere in the 12 to 15,000, which is still very big. Ret is about 17 and change for single target, and that's without an AUG. With an AUG, you can assume that's probably a 20k increase, maybe more. And that's just pure single target. The dot is doing about 5k DPS per target. It infinitely scales. Divine Storm, amongst other things, but the fact that Divine Storm does it, nothing else matters. Divine Storm applies the dot to everything. That means we have infinite uptime on an infinite number of targets. So you can just assume that that dot damage is just always there. It has a 101% uptime on infinite number of targets because Divine Storm applies it to everything. The dot damage, like I said, is doing about 5k DPS per target. So if you're in combat with 10 targets, the passive of the legendary alone is plus 50k DPS. That's how that works. You also have the active. The active does a little bit less than 1,000,000 damage on average over the course of 3 seconds on single target. It does a little more in AoE. You're probably just going to send it, generally speaking, when you run into one of those 3-second gaps in your rotation that you can't do anything, you'll press the legendary and you'll fill it. The overall numbers that I'm getting is somewhere around 8% of your overall damage. So you can pretty easily figure out what that is. So you got about 8% of your overall, and that's in your damage breakdown, by the way. That'll make it probably like your third or fourth damage in details. And then, of course, you got the single target increase of 20k, and you have just the general 7i levels, right? Which we haven't applied to the AoE. What does that all mean? What that means is while the DPS increase for your warrior and your DK is probably somewhere in that 25 to 30k range, it is a good bit higher for red. It's probably about 40k is the number that I've been hearing and seeing. And I'm also assuming that I could probably make it a little more efficient than I've seen, because I do that. I will make things more efficient. I will research. I will figure it out. But yeah, I'm sort of assuming it's that 35 to 40k DPS. The one thing I don't know is I don't know if the dot damage can be augmented. So like, does Aug make it do more damage? Does it get captured by Aug? I would assume not, but I'm not sure. So that's TBD. But the short version is you're probably looking at 35 to 40,000. Considering we're doing about 5% less, or maybe 3% less than the other meta specs without it. And specs are doing 3 to 400,000, so you're talking about maybe a 15 to 25k DPS difference. Red is going to be the highest damage in M+, possibly by a decent margin even. So if you're the highest damage and you're the tankiest spec in the game by a literal football field, like it's not even close. Red is the tankiest. Nothing comes even close. There's just a question of utility, right? For this season, I would say Ret has some of the best utility, right? We have Sack. That means we can help someone else live. So like your Aug, which is actually a very squishy target. It has a cheat def, but Aug is very squishy. So you have Sack for the Aug. You bring both Ret Aura and Devo Aura, and you can swap between them. So Devo Aura especially is helpful for avoiding one-shots. Ret Aura is just straight up like 3% damage increase for the whole squad. So it's kind of like Mark of the Wild in that sense. So you bring a 3% DR, you bring a 3% damage amp, you bring Sack, you bring Bop, you bring Lay on Hands, and you bring a Poison Dispel and Disease Dispel. Almost all of the dispels this season are either poison or disease, so that means you can get all of them, at least all the ones that matter. You also have some niche utility like Freedom in Everbloom. The stacking dot that the flowers apply to the tank is actually a slow debuff as well, so you can Freedom that off on the tank. So you just make tanking in Everbloom trivialized because those things are just no longer super scary because they're not taking like 500% more damage for no reason, and that allows them to do like quadruple pulls and stuff. So if we have the best utility in the game, or not the best, but one of the best utility packages for M+ this season specifically, We're unkillable, we're making other people unkillable, and we have the highest damage. Then meta with Lego is that belongs over here, right? That's what that means. Meta with Lego. And that's probably where the tier list looks. Right? I mean, you could put it over here, it doesn't really matter. But essentially, Ret would be meta. So if they're meta with Lego, what will the meta comp include? Would it include Ret? There's a good possibility. The problem is it's going to take time for people to reroll to Ret, because I think a lot of people were underestimating how much damage they do and everything else that they brung, but I think people are slowly starting to catch on. So I think you'll see a lot of people starting to reroll. I mean, there's already a Ret in the top 100. There's a Ret that's like 3,600 right now. So I don't think any of this is cope or bias. I mean, there's going to be some bias because I play Ret and I play it at a high level, but there is legitimately a Ret doing 29 keys right now. So, and by the way, that Ret does not have the Lego. So, I don't think this is bias at all. Yeah, Corva's doing 29 keys and he does not have the Lego. So, and by the way, he plays in a meme comp. He's playing with a Fury Warrior, which is definitely not efficient. But they don't care. They like just having fun. It's just they have like 5 really good players that just like having fun, and that's what they do. But yeah, I can very easily see Ret being meta.